Oh, good. Yeah. So Jean Van Damme is the co-founder and CEO of a new startup called Ester AI. So thank you for joining us today. And I wanted to start just by asking you a little bit about the company as far as what does Ester AI do?
Yeah. So maybe to explain what Esther does, I need to explain a little bit of where I come from and what my background is. So I
Please.
was born and raised in Belgium. I was born in Leuven, which is a town that gave birth to Stella Artois a long, long time ago. And I distinctly remember when I was a kid growing up, if the wind was right, that we could smell when the Stella Artois brewery was making beer, and so beer had always had a special place in um, my mind. And then when I went to college, did food chemistry, so also in Leuven, and did my thesis on wine and beer aroma analysis. So this was 2006. So it was like pre-technology, pre-artificial intelligence, pre-iPhone, pre-cloud. So I couldn't really do anything with all the data that I gathered at that point. Went on to do something else and ended up in grocery retail, working for a big Belgian food retailer. But that's when I met the woman who is now my wife, who is a New Yorker, and was like, if you want this to work, you have to move to New York. And so I did. And that's when I moved here 3 years ago, and a year later decided to start Ester. And so Ester kind of started from my love for food, and especially beer and wine, and also for what I saw in the grocery business. And what I loved in the grocery business is that they are, in the end, they're doing everything they do for the consumer. And so if as a grocer you want to be successful, you need to create a customer obsession. And that idea is something I really liked. And at the same time, I saw that while these companies were super obsessed by the customer, they had really, really bad data about the customer. And they had to rely on data from focus groups and questionnaires and tastings and data analysis and all of that. And then in the end, they would have a super high level persona that told them, like, this is my customer, which is incredibly generic. And I look back at what I did in college on all this flavor data, and I found that flavor was not part of the equation yet, or not enough at least. And so we decided to start Ester with the idea that we would offer them an opportunity to get better data and smarter data about why a consumer likes what they like, and why they dislike what they dislike. Um, so that was kind of the starting point. And I went back to what I knew, which was food chemistry and sensory science. And so I got in touch with the University of Leuven, with the lab of Professor Kevin Verstrepen, who is kind of a famous guy in the beer brewing community. And I also talked to Cornell University out here, and we started analyzing beers. We did like full chemical panels on all the compounds that you can find in beer, measuring over 250 chemical compounds, but also did a sensory analysis with a technical panel and gathered over 50 sensory compounds. And we started matching that with consumer data, where we asked consumers what stood out for you in this experience, and deliberately not only asking for did you think it was bitter, did you think it was sweet, did you think it was hoppy, but also just asking them, like, what stood out for you, not in a lab but in a real life environment, where the thing that could stand out for them might as well have been the packaging. It might as well have been, I was drinking it on the beach in the sun and it was really, really nice. So really asking for their impressions much more than for their taste experience per se. And then we took all those data and tried to find patterns in it. And it turns out that you can say a lot about people's flavor preference based on that data that you have. And so we decided to use that to create Ester as a recommendation engine that was not taking into account just, you know, you like sweet, so we're gonna recommend you sweet flavors, but to really on a very personalized level say like, well, typically what stands out for you is the packaging, but actually you might like another product with a different taste that has similar elements in that packaging, basically helping you as a consumer explore the whole, like the richness of what is out there in terms of beer and in terms of craft beer. And that's basically what we're doing at this point. We have our first, like we're still pretty early, so it means that we have our first retail client for which we're building our technology in their web shop. But at the same time, we're kind of using our analysis capability that we're still using to also, you know, help brewers get very actionable, very technical advice on their brews, on the products they're brewing. Looking at what they can improve. There are some compounds that you find when there is an off flavor, and basically giving people information about that. But at the same time, also showing them how their beer compares to all the other beers in the market, and like where they are in terms of flavor profile, where they are in terms of packaging, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of what we're doing with a team of 6 now, out of Antwerp, Brussels, Amsterdam, Stockholm, New York. So we're a truly remote team, which now is the best way to go. And really pushing to push that, to help craftsmen be craftsmen, and focus on like creating these amazing flavors that they're creating.
All right, thank you for that introduction. Viewers, if any of you have questions, please feel free to put it in the chat window, the Q&A window, or you could raise your hand and I could unmute you so you could ask a question live. But I'll go ahead and start. So how would it work as a consumer? Like if I wanted to go in and get my, you know, whatever sort of testing done, so you could recommend me other products that I may be interested in, how does that system work?
Yeah. So the best example I can give is basically through a web shop. So we see that definitely in the past couple of months that online beer sales have boomed, and that platforms like there's a friend of mine that owns bev.com that are doing, especially for craft brewers, helping them create retail channels online. And so if you go online, basically you get this list of products, right? And I don't know if you've ever bought beer or wine online, but you have a couple of thousand products that are available, and then you have to choose. And basically how we try to do it is, first, in the first phase, the first time you get in touch with us, we ask you a couple of questions. Not only the typical questions about certain flavors that you like that's certainly part of it. Do you like hoppy or do you like sweet, etc. But we're trying to really add that element of lifestyle to it. When do you typically drink? Do you drink alone at home, or do you drink on the beach with friends? Because it's a totally different flavor experience. And then we're gonna show you a couple of packagings and try to gauge how sensitive you are to the visuals on the packaging and what you like on that level as well. And based on those questions, we're going to recommend you a number of beers or wines for that matter. And then next time you come back, the goal is that we can ask you, so last time you bought this, how did you like it? And we are trying to gather information about your previous experiences, trying to understand from you what stood out for you again, what you noticed in a beer or in a wine. And that information gets fed into our algorithm that basically gives you further recommendation and more precise recommendations.
And do the recommendations span across categories? Because like I know beer, I really like beer, but then other beverages like wine or whiskey or something, I'm not as familiar with, and I have an interest in, but I don't know, I don't have that same familiarity where I say like, I know what I like. So if I put in what beers that I like, would you then be able to say, we think you might like this scotch or this wine?
So, I mean, it's a great question. I would say today, if you would ask me, are we there yet? I would say not yet, because the whole flavor, the whole logic behind flavor, and the reason why we take into account not only chemistry but also sensory analysis and also that more psychological side of things, is that flavor is incredibly individual. And flavor at the same time is also incredibly complicated. So I could sit here and tell you like, yeah, of course we can do it, and theoretically we should be able to do it. But I'll tell you yes when we've proven it. Basically, that's really important to me. We are focused on getting to that point, and so we're trying to get data from users and from products, both in beer and wine categories. We're talking now about adding spirits. I have a lifelong dream to add cheese to this as well, and food products, and in theory there is nothing that would tell us like, no, it's not gonna be possible, but we're just not there yet.
Do you think it would ever include like an in-person or maybe like an at-home test or something that you could do where you could say, okay, this person doesn't recognize that flavor under this certain threshold, so to fine tune people's particular
Yeah,
flavor
yeah.
tasting abilities?
Yeah, absolutely. There's two things that I see us adding in the future, and one is indeed that at home threshold thinking, like how do you taste, right? Bitterness is a great example because we all taste bitterness in a different way. It's impacted by a bunch of genes and a bunch of experiential things and things in your past, etc. as well. And so getting that data point, that base point, of how do you taste bitterness, that's certainly something that we could do. A second like challenge for the future is that we would like to have at home like measurement systems, so we can, right, we measure the chemical compounds and the sensory analysis for the beer in its best condition, like fresh off a fresh brew, and we get them in the lab, and we get some objective data and patterns for that product. What I would love is for us to be able to do a similar analysis, even if it's just for a few compounds, that people can do at home, that you can do with your phone, or that you can do with spectrometry, with advanced sensors, so that we can see how the product's flavor pattern changes through the supply chain, throughout the supply chain, and over time. That's something that we'll probably need 5 to 10 years to get there, but it's certainly a dream of mine that you can, take your glass of beer and then measure the flavor of it and say like, okay, I'm gonna like this or not. But that's the geek in me, or the scientist in me, that is showing up there.
Yeah, no, I think that could be really handy in, like all the shady bodegas in New York. I think you go, you buy a beer or something, and it's just been sitting on the shelf hot for the last like 6 months. It's not going to taste as good as what it could taste like.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's important because that first time you experience a product is when you create an idea about it, and when you create an opinion about it, right? And like if I have a bad experience with a beer that I've never had before, and that first experience is not ideal, is not the real product that I had in front of me, I'm just not going to try it again. It's and a lot of consumers act that way because they have so much choice out there. It's you have to get it right throughout the supply chain as well.
We have one viewer question from Pia. How do you determine what kind of questions to ask in your surveys for people when they first go on the web shop?
Yeah. So The way it works is that we start with a bunch of predetermined questions, but again, our algorithm learns as we go. And so, for example, when we see in those first 5 or 10 questions that you answer that you are very sensitive to, for example, the idea of a certain beer style. Imagine that out of the questionnaire, we know you look for IPAs, you look for bitters, etc. And then the questions that we'll ask later on are going to be a little bit more focused on that category, and we're going to ask you more about why you like that category. Does it have to do with it's the only thing I know, or does it have to do with I just love the flavor of it or the bitterness of it, or does it have to do with my husband likes IPA, and so I also like IPA, and those are the data points that we're trying to capture. So it starts off, and that's important to know, it starts off with a general piece of questions, but as soon as you give us data, we're gonna start drilling down and becoming more personalized.
And could you go into more detail on how like a brewery would use that information to improve their beers? Because
Yeah,
it's not always like a clear correlation between like a flavor characteristic and the recipe necessarily.
yeah,
Like,
exactly. So in the whole range of the 250 compounds that we measure and the 50 sensory compounds that we measure, as a brewer, you get a fantastic idea about where your product is on a flavor level, right? So you can tell what the kind of the pattern of your product is, but in a very, very objective way. Like the tasting panel that we use is also in Belgium, and they've been tasting for years, literally, and they do it 3 times a week. So you get a very high quality set of data on what the pattern, the flavor pattern of your beer is. And then in those compounds, there's 2 main things that we do with them. First of all is that in our work together with the University of Leuven, they know a lot about certain things you can see in that chemical fingerprints that say something about the product that you've made, about the process that you've followed. Certain off flavors come out, and so you get an idea of like, oh, this off flavor is typically generated when you didn't wash your pipes at a high enough temperature, for example. And then the very tangible advice could be, if we find those off flavors, or if we find certain things that we can link to a technical piece of brewing advice, we're going to share them with you immediately. The second piece of information is that for brewers, and certainly because there are so many beers out there, it's not always easy to know, like, how do I stand out? How do I make a beer that is truly differentiating, that is truly different? And that can be through the flavor of the beer, but it can also be through the marketing, through the packaging, through the audience that you're trying to reach. And so our goal is that as a brewer, you can use the data that you get. We're gonna compare it with other beers' data. Not giving you the detailed analysis of your biggest competitor, but telling you, like, in the market, this is where you're positioned. This is how your beer stacks up to other beers in the market. This is like other beers that are very similar in flavor profile, and it's something that as a brewer, and certainly as a product owner, as a brewery owner, that you can learn from, that you can so you can see, like, oh, so our beer is in flavor profile the same as that other beer, but we're marketing in a very different way. That's kind of the data point that you're getting as an inspiration. And a good example of that, like, no commercial, but this is a book that Kevin, the professor at the lab in Leuven, wrote. I think they published it last year, about Belgian beers. And so this is obviously the very consumer oriented phase of this, or version of this. but this gives you like a data point about other beers in the markets that are around, and like the sensory profile, and how it stacks up to other beers in your style and all that stuff. So we would, for brewers, give you a very, very updated or a very extended version of what's in this book.
We had Supina from Kevin's lab on here
Yes.
for our earlier interview. So I don't think everyone who's on now was there for that, since it was, a couple hours ago in the middle of the night. But that flows really nicely into this. So she talked a little bit about that book, and it's nice because they clustered all the beer styles on like something like 233 chemical compounds found in beer, for 250 different Belgian beers. So you could see, okay, if you like the Westvleteren 12, then you should probably also try the Rochefort 10, because they have, a lot of compounds in common with each other. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And their research is basically what we've based Ester on. So we also work with them in a very structural way. So
is that also where the tasting panel is? She mentioned
for now, that's where the tasting panel is. We are in the process of figuring out how we can bring that to the US as well. Because of course the challenge for us is to ship all these beers to Belgium, and certainly now that is very, very difficult and extremely expensive. So I'm now in the process of trying to set up both a lab and a tasting panel out here that can give the same quality analysis with tasters that have been trained in the exact same way. So we can also keep comparing Belgian beers to US beers on a product level. And the goal for us is to make a book like this, but for US craft beers, right? It would be way thicker, but that's the goal.
Excellent. Yeah, that's very exciting. I think if you ever need any tasters or anything, definitely reach out to the Brewminaries. We have a lot of people, and they're BJCP judges who have been trained in sensory analysis. And I know there's a lot more extensive training and everything that goes into the tasting panels that you have, but we have a lot of people who love drinking beer. So yeah, we have one question.
Yeah.
What is the training criteria for tasters? I think we have some interested.
Well, I mean, you should certainly let me know. So on our website, you can sign up for the newsletter, and you can send us a message as well. You should certainly let me know if you're interested. Because in terms of criteria, the interesting thing is that I can tell you that you need to have a certain training. Like what we do in a typical training program is that we try to get an idea of how good of a taster you are. And with good, just to be really honest, it doesn't really have to do with a skill. It's something that you get from nature or not, right? And so we test that, and based on the results of that test, we can tell you like, yeah, we would love to have you on our panel. And then we give you all the training, and that's something that you can learn. Like technical tasting is a skill, but you need kind of the genetic background to do it. And in all openness, I'm not a fantastic taster, so I don't do a lot of sensory tasting myself. But that's what we're looking for. We're looking with people with sensitive enough, with taste buds that are sensitive enough that we can then train. That's
Oh, excellent. So I'll put the website in the chat box, but it's ester.ai. So anyone who's interested, sign up for the newsletter and get some more information there. And we have one other question. So the question is, what's been your most rewarding partnership so far? So I don't know if you have some commercial customers that you're working with already, or if that could apply to the academic collaboration.
Yeah, I think, well, so there's a couple of things. Like, first of all, I think as a scientist working with these, with the University of Leuven, with the Cornell University, like with all these people that are really passionate about flavor and how that flavor comes to fruition, like how yeast and how to process, how you can play with that. That has been extremely rewarding. But even more than that, I mean, coming from Belgium, being in the US for only a couple of years, getting kind of linked to the brewing community in the US and the craft brewers in the US has been extremely rewarding. We're doing some work with like the mid-sized breweries or the breweries at the higher volumes in the US, like Sierra Nevada, for example. But what is incredibly fun is to see that that community is such a tight community, just like it is in Belgium. It's a lot of creative people that are incredibly passionate about their products, and we like it really informed us in our focus to become a company that is not trying to take over, but trying to enable the industry, both on the producer side and on the retailer side, like getting the best beers to the consumers. That's our challenge, and giving the information and making the information available to be able to do that. That's been kind of where we are. And the craft brewing community is a lot of fun. There's a lot of cool people out there.
Absolutely, yeah. We have a lot of great breweries in our area, and a lot of them, you know, have come onto this Brew-a-thon over the last 24 hours, and it's certainly a great community. What lab at Cornell do you work with? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's the Robin Dando lab, which is a lab. They focus on a lot of the consumer work, and what is interesting is that they've done a lot of research on how everything that has to do with flavor is influenced by context, and how if you want to have people give you objective information. What we all do in the testing that is available now is you take away all the context. You put people in a booth and you give them a glass that is black, and then you don't show the packaging, etc. But actually, a lot of the flavor experience is built into that experience as well, in where you drink, in the packaging, in the shape of the glass, in whether the waiter was nice to you or not. Like all those data elements are important. And what the lab at Cornell is doing is trying to incorporate like objective measurements and balance them with the data that we can gather, and the flavor experience that you create.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing. So we've only got a couple minutes left. So viewers, if you have any additional questions, get them in the chat box now or in the Q&A window. So with your whole team, you're 6 people scattered across, you know, several countries. What is that like working together? And do you see differences in, like, are you just targeting the US market right now, or are you also working with companies in other countries, and how do the markets differ?
Right. So, I mean, we do a lot of work in the European market as well. And, you know, while I am here, most of the team is in Europe. And so for us from the beginning, it was very obvious that we wanted to be in both markets at the same time. If you look at wine and beer consumption, like over 80% of the production and consumption happens in those 2 continents. So that's where you want to be. And to me, really interesting is also the difference between the 2, and discovering the difference between the 2, both on the level of flavor profile and how people taste, but also on the level of how businesses